Something strange happens when things finally start working. Not the big dramatic moment people imagine, not fireworks, not relief. What usually happens is tension. You thought momentum would feel exciting. You thought progress would feel freeing. Instead, it feels delicate, like you're holding something you don't want to drop. You notice yourself checking things more often, replaying decisions in your head, wondering if this is real or temporary, and almost no one talks about this part. Because from the outside, it looks like you're doing better, but on the inside, it feels unfamiliar. There's a quiet thought that shows up for a lot of people at this stage. What if this doesn't last? That thought doesn't mean you're ungrateful. It doesn't mean you're negative. It means your nervous system hasn't caught up yet. For a long time, life trained you to brace. Brace for bills. Brace for setbacks. Brace for disappointment. So when momentum appears, your body doesn't celebrate. It prepares. It waits for the other shoe to drop. This is where many people make a mistake without realizing it. They interpret this tension as a problem. They think something is wrong because it doesn't feel solid yet. So they start doing things to relieve the discomfort. They slow down. They overthink. They tighten up. They pull back just enough to feel safe again. And in doing that, they interrupt the very momentum they worked so hard to build. Not because they're sabotaging themselves, but because they're trying to feel normal. Here's the truth that changes everything. Momentum always feels fragile at first. Not because it is fragile, but because it's unfamiliar. Your system knows how to survive struggle. It knows how to endure pressure. It knows how to operate in tight spaces. But expansion requires recalibration. And recalibration feels unstable before it feels natural. Think about any time in your life you leveled up. A new job, a new responsibility, a new environment. At first, everything felt slightly off. You were more alert, more careful, more aware of your mistakes. That didn't mean you weren't capable. It meant you were adjusting. Growth always feels shaky before it feels solid. The problem is that most people don't give themselves time to adjust. They rush to feel comfortable again. They confuse comfort with correctness. So instead of letting the new level settle, they retreat to the old one where their nervous system knows the rules. This is why people fall back after early success. Not because they aren't disciplined, not because they aren't smart, but because they don't recognize adjustment for what it is. If you're listening to this and thinking, that's exactly how it felt when things started to improve for me, that's a good sign. It means nothing is wrong. It means you were expanding. And expansion is supposed to feel unfamiliar. The goal at this stage is not to prove anything, not to push harder, not to rush stability. The goal is simply this. Don't interrupt what's working just to calm your nerves. Let the discomfort exist without acting on it. That's how momentum becomes real. Not by force, by tolerance. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about why your nervous system doesn't trust ease yet, and how to teach it that calm does not mean danger. There's a reason ease feels strange to you, and it has nothing to do with gratitude, nothing to do with mindset, nothing to do with character. It has everything to do with what your body learned long before your mind ever got involved. For a long time, effort was your safety signal. Trying hard meant you were doing something right. Being busy meant you were responsible. Feeling pressure meant you were awake, alert, on top of things. So your nervous system learned a very specific association. Tension equals safety. Ease equals uncertainty. No one explained this to you. It just happened. Bills created urgency. Deadlines created focus. Stress created motion. And motion felt like control. So when life finally starts to smooth out, something feels off. You're not fighting fires. You're not scrambling. You're not constantly bracing. And instead of feeling calm, your body starts asking questions. Why does this feel quiet? Am I missing something? Shouldn't I be doing more? This is where people misunderstand themselves. They think they're anxious because something is wrong. In reality, they're anxious because something is different. Ease is unfamiliar territory. Your nervous system isn't built to celebrate unfamiliar territory. It's built to scan it. So it stays alert, it stays tight, it waits. That waiting feels uncomfortable, and discomfort demands resolution. So people unconsciously create friction. They overwork, they overplan, they reintroduce urgency, they complicate things that we're starting to simplify. Not because they enjoy stress, but because stress feels recognizable. Let's slow this down. Imagine someone who has lived in noise for years. Traffic, crowds, constant stimulation. Then suddenly, they're in silence. At first, silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels loud. Every thought is amplified. Every sensation stands out. Every little sound feels intrusive. Eventually, silence becomes soothing, but only after the nervous system recalibrates. Ease works the same way. When you're used to effort-driven survival, calm doesn't feel safe yet. It feels exposed. So your body does what it was trained to do. It tightens, it monitors, it prepares. And most people interpret that as a sign to do something. They mistake adaptation for danger. Here's the key insight most people never get. Ease is not the absence of danger. It's the absence of familiarity. And familiarity takes time. People who sustain success don't rush to fill quiet space. They don't panic when things feel light. They don't manufacture urgency to feel productive. They let calm exist long enough for it to become normal. That's the part most people skip. They treat discomfort as a problem instead of a transition. And transitions always feel unstable at first. This is why people say things like, "I don't know why I'm stressed. Things are actually going well." That sentence is the clue. It means your external world has changed faster than your internal one. Your life has expanded. Your nervous system hasn't caught up yet. And that mismatch creates tension. Here's where things get important. You don't fix this by pushing. You don't fix this by thinking positive. You don't fix this by staying busy. You fix this by staying present without interfering. That means when things feel calm, you don't rush to disrupt it. When progress slows naturally, you don't assume it's failing. When ease shows up, you don't question whether you deserve it. You let your body learn a new association. Calm does not equal danger. Quiet does not equal collapse. Ease does not mean loss of control. This learning doesn't happen overnight. It happens through repetition, through staying in moments that used to make you nervous, through not self-correcting back into stress, through letting days be lighter without punishing yourself for it. That's how regulation happens, and regulation is what allows expansion to stabilize. Here's a subtle but powerful truth. People don't lose momentum because they stop working. They lose momentum because they can't relax without guilt. They think ease is laziness. They think calm is complacency. They think peace means they're falling behind. So they reintroduce pressure, and pressure creates the illusion of progress. But illusion doesn't compound. Stability does. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about something that makes this even harder. Why success doesn't reduce pressure the way people expect, and how expectations quietly replace survival as the new source of stress. Most people think success will feel like release, like a long exhale, like finally setting something down, like relief. But when success actually arrives, that's not what happens. What usually happens is pressure changes shape. The old pressure was obvious. Bills, deadlines, uncertainty, survival. You knew where it came from. You knew why it existed. You knew what to do with it. You pushed. But when things start working, a new kind of pressure shows up. It's quieter, less visible, harder to explain. And because no one prepares you for it, it catches people off guard. The pressure sounds like this. Now I have to keep this going. Now people expect more from me. Now I can't mess this up. Before, pressure came from lack. Now it comes from responsibility. And responsibility feels heavier because it's personal. When you're struggling, you can point outward. Circumstances, timing, systems. When you're succeeding, the spotlight turns inward. Your decisions matter more. Your mistakes feel more expensive. Your margin for error feels smaller. And suddenly, success feels tight instead of freeing. This is where many people quietly panic. They don't say it out loud. They don't even admit it to themselves. But internally, they start bracing again. They stop enjoying progress. They start managing it. They grip instead of flow. They think, if I relax, I'll lose this. If I slow down, it will disappear. So instead of letting success settle, they hold it too tightly. And that tension becomes exhausting. Here's the part no one explains. Success doesn't remove pressure. It reveals your relationship with pressure. If pressure used to motivate you, you don't know how to move without it. If urgency used to drive you, calm feels disorienting. If survival shaped your identity, stability feels like standing on unfamiliar ground. So the nervous system does what it knows. It creates pressure where it can. More goals, higher expectations, self-imposed urgency. You don't need anyone else to push you anymore. You do it yourself. And because it's self-generated, it feels justified. You call it ambition. You call it discipline. You call it staying sharp. But underneath it is fear. Not fear of failing, fear of falling back. This fear doesn't scream. It whispers. It says, don't get comfortable. Stay alert. Keep proving yourself. And proving yourself never ends, because proof has no finish line. This is how success quietly becomes stressful. Not because it's hard, but because you don't trust it yet. You don't trust that it can exist without constant effort. You don't trust that you can hold it without tension. You don't trust that you're allowed to settle. So you stay on edge. And edge living looks productive until it isn't. Here's where things shift. People who sustain success don't eliminate pressure. They change their relationship to it. They stop using pressure as fuel. They stop believing that ease means weakness. They stop equating calm with complacency. They learn something critical. Pressure is not what keeps momentum alive. Regulation is. A regulated system can respond. An unregulated system reacts. Reaction looks like overworking, overthinking, overcorrecting. Response looks like clarity, pacing, intentional movement. Most people never learn the difference. They think pressure equals performance, but pressure eventually collapses performance. It just takes time. Sustainable success requires something different. It requires the ability to move forward without being chased, to make decisions without urgency, to let expectations exist without letting them control you, to hold responsibility without tightening your grip. That ability doesn't come from confidence. It comes from familiarity, from letting success exist long enough that it stops feeling fragile, from allowing expectations to rise without rising with them, from realizing you don't have to match pressure with pressure. This is where people either stabilize or spiral. Those who spiral try to outrun the pressure. They push harder. They speed up. They do more. Those who stabilize do something quieter. They slow their internal pace while keeping external momentum. They separate urgency from importance. They let responsibility rest on structure instead of emotion. That's not passive. That's mastery. And it's rare. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about one of the most misunderstood moments in this whole process, the relapse that happens under stress, and why going backward during pressure doesn't mean you're failing. There's a moment that catches people by surprise. It doesn't happen during success. It doesn't happen during growth. It happens during stress. Something difficult comes up, something unexpected, something heavy, and suddenly you notice yourself doing things you thought you outgrew. Old habits return, old reactions surface, old patterns reappear. You snap more easily. You avoid things you were handling well. You reach for comfort instead of clarity, and the thought shows up fast. I thought I was past this. I guess I didn't really change. Maybe this was all temporary. This moment discourages more people than outright failure ever does, because relapse feels like proof. Proof that the new level wasn't real. Proof that growth didn't stick. Proof that you're still who you used to be. But that interpretation is wrong. Stress does not erase growth. Stress reveals wiring. When pressure hits, your nervous system doesn't ask, "What's the best version of me now?" It asks, "What has kept me safe before?" And it answers honestly. It reaches for what's familiar. What worked in the past? What required the least thought? That doesn't mean you're regressing. It means you're human. Here's the part most people miss. Growth doesn't remove old patterns. It adds new ones. The old ones don't disappear. They just stop being your default until stress spikes. Then they knock on the door again. People who don't understand this panic. They think they've fallen off the path. They overcorrect. They shame themselves. They try to get back to who they were last week. And in doing that, they create instability, not because they relapsed, but because they reacted to the relapse. Let's slow this down. If you learn to survive in chaos, chaos will always feel familiar. If you learn to cope through tension, tension will always feel tempting. If you learn to move through urgency, urgency will always feel available. Stress reactivates old maps. That doesn't mean you've lost new ones. The difference between people who stay expanded and those who fall back is not whether old patterns appear. It's how they respond when they do. People who fall back make meaning out of relapse. They tell a story about it. This proves I'm not ready. This means I can't handle more. This shows I was pretending. People who stay expanded don't tell a story. They observe. They say, oh, that's the old response. Interesting. Stress brings that up. Okay, let's slow down. No drama, no judgment, no urgency. They don't rush to fix themselves. They don't punish themselves. They don't try to erase the moment. They let it pass. And it does because patterns lose power when they aren't fed. Here's a subtle truth. Relapse feels intense because it activates shame, and shame demands resolution. Shame says, do something now. Correct this. Make it right. But correction under shame almost always creates more instability. Stability comes from non-reaction, from allowing a moment to exist without defining you. Think about this. If a calm person loses their temper once, we don't redefine them. If a healthy person eats poorly one day, we don't call them unhealthy. But when it comes to growth, people hold themselves to impossible standards. They think evolution should be permanent and linear. It's not. It's layered. Old patterns surface less often. They pass more quickly. They hold less authority. That's growth, not perfection. Here's what matters most in these moments, not what shows up, but what you do next. Do you tighten? Do you spiral? Do you abandon the new level emotionally? Or do you stay present? Do you slow your breathing? Do you let the moment move through without collapsing into it? That choice determines whether the relapse becomes a setback or a reinforcement. Because every time you experience stress and don't fall all the way back, your nervous system learns something new. It learns, we can handle this. We don't need to panic. We don't need to revert completely. That learning compounds. And over time, stress stops triggering collapse. It triggers regulation. This is why people who truly stabilize don't talk much about motivation. They talk about recovery, how quickly they return to center, how little they dramatize setbacks, how gently they treat themselves when old habits appear. They don't confuse a moment with a meaning. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about something that often follows this phase. Why hustle, which helped you break through, starts quietly working against you once you're on the other side. Hustle helps you break out, but hustle is not what keeps you there. That's a hard sentence for a lot of people to hear, because hustle probably saved you at some point. It got you through pressure. It pushed you through doubt. It carried you when motivation was low. Hustle gave you momentum when nothing else would. So when things start working, it feels logical to keep leaning on it, to push harder, to stay sharp, to never let up. But here's the shift most people don't see coming. What creates momentum is not what stabilizes it. Hustle is a survival response. It's designed for short bursts, not long seasons. It works beautifully when you're trying to escape. It quietly damages you when you're trying to sustain. The problem isn't effort. The problem is identity. When hustle becomes who you are, rest feels dangerous. Slowing down feels irresponsible. Ease feels earned only through exhaustion. So even when your external life improves, your internal pace stays frantic. You keep running even when there's no one chasing you. And that's exhausting. Here's what happens next. Your body starts sending signals. Fatigue, irritability, brain fog, loss of joy. But instead of listening, you interpret those signals as weakness. You think, I just need to be more disciplined. I can't afford to slow down now. This is what success requires. So you push harder. And that's when burnout sneaks in quietly. Not as collapse, as dullness. The work still gets done. The progress still exists. But something inside you goes flat. And flatness scares people more than struggle. Because struggle at least feels alive. So they reintroduce urgency. They add pressure. They chase the feeling of drive they used to have. But that drive was never meant to last forever. It was a bridge, not a home. People who sustain success learn something critical. The energy that builds is different from the energy that holds. Building energy is aggressive. Holding energy is calm. Building energy is about output. Holding energy is about regulation. And regulation doesn't feel heroic. It feels quiet, unimpressive, boring to people addicted to intensity. But boring is stable. This is where many people unknowingly sabotage themselves. They think, if I stop hustling, I'll lose my edge. But what they actually lose is clarity. Hustle narrows focus. It compresses perspective. It sacrifices long-term thinking for short-term action. That's useful when you're breaking out. It's dangerous when you're maintaining altitude. At higher levels, decisions matter more than effort. You don't need to do more. You need to choose better. And choice requires calm. People who stay expanded don't abandon effort. They change its role. Effort stops being fuel. It becomes a tool. They don't wake up in urgency. They wake up in intention. They move consistently, not frantically. They rest without guilt. They stop equating exhaustion with virtue. This doesn't happen because they're lazy. It happens because they're protective of capacity. Capacity is what keeps momentum alive. Not how hard you can push today, but how steadily you can show up for years. Here's a quiet truth most people miss. Hustle teaches you to override your signals. Sustainability teaches you to listen to them. Listening doesn't slow growth. It refines it. It tells you when to pause, when to push, when to let something settle. People who ignore these signals don't fail dramatically. They erode. They lose curiosity. They lose creativity. They lose emotional range. And eventually they wonder why success feels empty. The goal was never to escape struggle, just to replace it with pressure. The goal was to build a life that doesn't require constant force. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about something that often follows the end of hustle. The strange identity gap that appears when you're no longer fighting for survival, and how people accidentally create chaos just to feel like themselves again. There's a phase almost no one warns you about. It comes after the pressure eases, after the hustle slows, after survival is no longer the main objective, and it feels empty. Not empty in a depressing way, empty in a confusing way. You're not unhappy. You're not failing. You're not in crisis. You're just not sure who you are right now. This catches people off guard because they thought success would feel like arrival, like clarity, like confidence. Instead, it feels like standing still without instructions. This is what an identity hangover feels like. For a long time, your identity was built around effort, around striving, around pushing through. You were the builder, the fighter, the one who kept going. Those identities gave you structure. They told you how to wake up, how to move, how to measure yourself. But once you're no longer in survival mode, those identities lose their grip, and nothing immediately replaces them. So there's a gap, a quiet space where old definitions don't fit anymore, but new ones haven't settled yet. Most people don't recognize this gap for what it is. They think something is wrong. They say things like, I feel unmotivated. I don't know what I want anymore. I should be happier than this. So they do what they know. They create urgency. They add pressure. They stir up chaos. Not because they enjoy it, but because chaos feels familiar. It gives them something to react to, something to push against, something to prove. And for a moment it works. They feel alive again, driven again, necessary again. But then the exhaustion returns because they didn't need more motivation. They needed a new identity. Here's the truth most people never hear. You cannot carry the same identity into every phase of your life. The identity that helps you escape is not the identity that helps you sustain. Builders burn out if they never learn how to hold. Fighters collapse if they never learn how to rest without guilt. The hangover happens because your nervous system hasn't caught up with your circumstances. Your life changed faster than your self-image. And instead of letting identity evolve, people cling to the old one. They keep asking, how do I get my drive back? How do I feel hungry again? How do I stay intense? But intensity was a response to lack, and lack is no longer the environment, so intensity doesn't fit anymore. This is where people accidentally sabotage themselves. They downgrade their life emotionally. They create problems. They chase discomfort, not consciously, but because struggle made sense of them. Struggle gave them worth. Struggle gave them purpose. Struggle told them who they were. And without it, they feel unanchored. Here's what helps. You don't replace the old identity with a new label. You replace it with capacity. Instead of being the one who pushes, you become the one who decides. Instead of being the one who survives, you become the one who chooses. Instead of being the one who reacts, you become the one who regulates. That doesn't feel dramatic. It feels subtle. It feels quieter, less adrenaline-based, more grounded. And at first, that quiet feels wrong, like you're losing something. But you're not losing. You're integrating. Integration is when growth settles into the body, when effort turns into confidence, when movement turns into presence. This phase doesn't require fixing. It requires patience. Letting yourself be in between. Letting the old identity loosen without forcing a new one. Letting calm become familiar instead of suspicious. People who rush this phase either burn out or fall back. People who allow it stabilize at a higher level. They stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming now?" That question doesn't demand urgency. It invites curiosity. And curiosity is the doorway to sustainable growth. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about a trap that often appears once people stabilize. The urge to keep proving themselves, even when nothing needs to be proven anymore. At first, proving yourself feels productive. It feels motivating. It feels focused. It feels like growth. After all, proving yourself probably helped you get here. You showed up early. You worked harder. You pushed when others slowed down. Proof mattered. It earned trust. It earned opportunity. It earned momentum. But there's a point where proving yourself quietly turns against you. And most people don't notice when that shift happens, because the behavior doesn't look destructive. It looks admirable. You keep setting higher standards. You keep raising the bar. You keep expecting more from yourself. And on the surface, that looks like ambition. But underneath it, something else is happening. You're no longer building. You're performing. Instead of moving forward, you're trying to justify where you are. Instead of growing into the next level, you're trying to validate the current one. And validation is a hungry thing. It never feels complete. Here's how this trap forms. When you come from struggle, your sense of worth often gets tied to output, to effort, to visible results. You learn that doing more makes you safer, more respectable, more deserving. So when success arrives, you don't relax into it. You tighten. You think, "I need to keep earning this. I can't let up. I don't want anyone to think I don't deserve this." And slowly, your life becomes a performance, not for others, for yourself. You start measuring your days by productivity, your value by output, your peace by proof, and peace never comes. Because proving yourself has no finish line. There's always another metric, another comparison, another expectation. This is why people who make it still feel restless. They're no longer running from lack. They're running from doubt. Doubt that says, "What if this was a fluke? What if I can't keep this up? What if they find me out?" So they keep proving. They don't rest deeply. They don't enjoy fully. They don't let anything feel complete. And that constant tension erodes sustainability. Here's the reframe that changes everything. At higher levels, proof is no longer required. Presence is. You don't need to prove you belong. You need to occupy the space you've already earned. That's uncomfortable at first, because occupying space means allowing stillness, allowing visibility without performance, allowing value without constant demonstration. It means letting yourself exist without justifying it. People who stay expanded learn to replace proving with grounding. They ask different questions. Not, "How do I show I deserve this?" but, "How do I hold this well?" That question changes behavior instantly. Holding well means pacing yourself. Holding well means choosing sustainability over intensity. Holding well means not escalating expectations just to feel worthy. This is where people either mature or burn out, because proving energy is exhausting. It keeps you on edge. It keeps you vigilant. It keeps you disconnected from enjoyment. Grounded energy, on the other hand, is calm. It's quiet. It's durable. It allows you to move forward without urgency, to grow without pressure, to succeed without tension. Here's something subtle. When you stop proving yourself, other people often trust you more. Not because you're louder, but because you're steadier. Confidence without performance feels solid. It feels safe. It feels real. And that kind of presence attracts opportunity without effort. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming rooted. Rooted people don't rush, they don't scramble, they don't chase validation, they decide, they move, they hold. And holding is the skill most people were never taught. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the identity shift that makes this possible, the move from being a builder to becoming a holder, and why holding requires a completely different kind of strength. And holding is the skill most people were never taught, because holding doesn't look impressive. There's no applause for steadiness, no praise for restraint, no recognition for not panicking. Holding looks like calm when others rush, like silence when others explain, like patience when others scramble. And if you grew up being rewarded for effort, that calm can feel invisible. You might even feel guilty for it. You might think, I should be doing more. I shouldn't feel this settled yet. I don't want to lose my edge. But here's the truth that changes the entire game. Your edge doesn't come from pressure, it comes from clarity. And clarity only shows up when you stop proving, when you stop turning every moment into a test, when you stop measuring your worth by output, when you stop escalating expectations just to feel legitimate. At higher levels, proving becomes noise. It clouds judgment, it accelerates burnout, it distorts priorities. People who stay expanded learn to tolerate something that once felt uncomfortable. They tolerate enough. They allow a win to be a win. They let progress settle. They don't immediately stack the next demand on top of it. That restraint isn't laziness, it's intelligence. Because every time you escalate without integration, you weaken your foundation. This is why some people appear successful but live on edge. They never let anything land. They never let anything be complete. They're always bracing for the next test, and eventually their nervous system revolts. Holding energy is different. Holding energy says, this is stable. This is mine to carry. I don't need to justify this. That internal posture changes everything. It slows reaction time. It sharpens decision-making. It restores enjoyment. And enjoyment matters more than people admit. Because enjoyment keeps you in the game. Not hype, not fear, not pressure, enjoyment. When you enjoy your life, you protect it. You pace it. You make decisions that preserve it. When you're proving, you sacrifice it. This is the quiet turning point. The moment when success stops being something you defend and becomes something you inhabit. You stop asking, am I doing enough? And start asking, is this sustainable? That question doesn't make you smaller. It makes you durable. And durability is what separates temporary success from lasting expansion. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the shift that makes all of this possible. The move from being someone who builds relentlessly to someone who can actually hold more without tightening up. That's where real stability begins. There's a quiet shift that has to happen if you want expansion to last. It's the shift from being someone who builds to being someone who can hold. Most people never make this shift consciously. They stumble into it, resist it, or avoid it altogether. Because building feels active, holding feels passive, and passive feels dangerous to people who survive by pushing. When you're building, everything makes sense. You're adding, you're striving, you're moving forward. Effort feels justified. Tension feels productive. Fatigue feels meaningful. But holding asks something different from you. Holding asks you to stay steady when nothing dramatic is happening, to remain calm when there's nothing to chase, to resist the urge to create problems just to feel useful. That's harder than it sounds. Because when you've been a builder for a long time, motion equals safety. Stillness feels like risk. So when things finally stabilize, many people get restless. They think, shouldn't I be doing more? Am I getting complacent? What if I lose momentum? And without realizing it, they start shaking the structure they worked so hard to build. They change plans too quickly. They add unnecessary complexity. They chase the next challenge before the current one has settled. Not because they're greedy, because they're uncomfortable with calm. Here's the truth. Building requires force. Holding requires regulation. Force pushes against resistance. Regulation allows things to stay in place. And regulation doesn't feel powerful. It feels subtle. It feels like breathing slower when your instinct is to speed up. It feels like pausing before reacting. It feels like letting something be good enough without immediately escalating it. This is why people confuse holding with stagnation. They think if they're not pushing, they're falling behind. But that's not how growth works at higher levels. At higher levels, growth happens through integration, not acceleration. Integration is when your nervous system catches up to your life. When your habits match your capacity, when your pace aligns with your responsibility. Without integration, expansion collapses. You can build something faster than you can hold it. And when that happens, the structure fails. Not because it was wrong, but because it wasn't supported. Think about weightlifting. You don't just add weight endlessly. Your body needs time to adapt. Your joints need to strengthen. Your nervous system needs to coordinate. Income, responsibility, and visibility work the same way. Holding is adaptation. People who learn to hold stop measuring progress by intensity. They start measuring it by stability. They ask, can I sustain this without burning out? Can I enjoy this without guilt? Can I let this be normal? Those questions sound small, but they determine everything. Here's something subtle. Holding requires trust, not trust in circumstances. Trust in yourself. Trust that you can maintain without micromanaging. Trust that you don't need to be tense to be effective. Trust that calm won't make you lazy. The trust is built, not assumed. It comes from staying present during quiet periods, from not panicking during plateaus, from letting things breathe without interfering. Most people never practice this. They only practice pushing. So when pushing is no longer required, they feel lost. They say, I don't know what to do with myself. I feel unmotivated. I feel like I'm wasting time. But what they're really feeling is unfamiliar safety, and safety feels strange to a system trained in survival. People who master holding don't eliminate ambition. They soften urgency. They still move forward. They still refine. They still grow. But they do it from clarity, not pressure. They make fewer decisions and better ones. They speak less and mean more. They react slower and respond cleaner. That's holding. It's not flashy. It doesn't announce itself. But it's what keeps success from slipping through your fingers. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about why stability isn't something you're born with. It's a skill, and how some people learn to stay steady no matter what's happening around them. There's a myth that some people are just naturally steady, that they were born calm, that they don't get rattled, that they simply handle pressure better. It looks that way from the outside, but it's almost never true. Stability is not a personality trait, it's a skill. And like any skill, it's learned through exposure, not intention. Most people think stability means nothing ever bothers you, that you don't feel fear, that you don't get overwhelmed. That's not stability. Stability is what happens after something bothers you. It's how quickly you return to center, how little you dramatize internal noise, how much space you allow between stimulus and response. People who stay expanded aren't calm because nothing affects them. They're calm because they've practiced not reacting when things do. That practice usually begins unintentionally. They go through something difficult. They survive it. They notice they didn't break. That experience rewires trust. Not trust in life, trust in themselves. Over time, that trust compounds. They stop assuming every spike of emotion requires action. They stop treating discomfort like an emergency. They stop letting every thought dictate behavior. And that's where stability lives. Most people never learn this because they intervene too quickly. Something feels off and they rush to fix it. Something feels uncertain and they overcorrect. Something feels uncomfortable and they try to escape it. That keeps the nervous system fragile because it never learns that discomfort can pass without collapse. People who develop stability do the opposite. They pause, they breathe, they wait. Not passively, intentionally. They allow a wave to move through without building a story around it. And every time they do that, their system learns, we're okay. We don't need to panic. This doesn't require drastic action. That learning is subtle, but it's powerful. Here's why stability matters so much at higher levels. When income increases, decisions multiply. When responsibility grows, consequences matter more. When visibility expands, reactions carry weight. Without stability, people become reactive. They make emotional decisions. They change direction too often. They mistake feelings for facts. And reactivity is expensive. It costs time, it costs energy, it costs credibility. Stability, on the other hand, creates consistency, not rigid consistency, responsive consistency. The ability to adapt without unraveling, to adjust without abandoning direction, to experience stress without becoming it. This is why some people seem unshakable. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they don't become what they feel. They let emotions inform them, not drive them. That distinction changes everything. Stability also changes how others experience you. People trust steadiness. They relax around it. They rely on it. Not because it's loud, because it's predictable in the best way. Predictable doesn't mean boring. It means dependable. And dependability compounds. People offer opportunities to those who don't overreact, who don't panic under pressure, who don't need reassurance to move forward. That's not luck, that's regulation. Here's something important. Stability doesn't mean suppressing emotion. It means holding it without spilling it everywhere. You still feel disappointment. You still feel fear. You still feel doubt. You just don't hand the steering wheel to them. You notice them. You name them. You stay present. Then you decide from clarity, not impulse. This is what allows expansion to last. Because life doesn't get easier as you grow. It gets heavier. More people. More decisions. More consequences. Without stability, weight collapses structures. With stability, weight strengthens them. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about one of the most important transitions in staying expanded. How people normalize a new level without inflating their lifestyle or shrinking their ambition. When people first reach a new level, they think the goal is to enjoy it. That sounds obvious, but enjoyment isn't actually the hard part. Normalization is. Normalization is when something stops feeling like a temporary win and starts feeling like your life. And most people don't know how to let that happen. They either inflate too fast or they shrink. Inflation looks like this. You upgrade everything immediately. You raise expectations overnight. You speed your lifestyle up to match the new number. That creates pressure. Pressure to maintain. Pressure to keep earning. Pressure to not fall back. And pressure destabilizes what hasn't settled yet. Shrinking looks different. You downplay the win. You act like nothing changed. You keep living as if it could disappear any moment. That creates tension. Tension to stay small. Tension to not be noticed. Tension to not get ahead of yourself. Both reactions prevent normalization. Normalization requires patience. It's the willingness to let the new level exist without commentary. No celebration every day. No minimizing either. Just living. Most people rush this phase because silence makes them nervous. When nothing dramatic is happening, they wonder, is this still working? Should I be doing something? Am I wasting momentum? But momentum doesn't disappear in quiet. It consolidates. Think about it like moving to a new city. At first, everything feels intense. You notice everything. You're alert all the time. Eventually, you stop noticing, not because the city got worse, because it became home. That's normalization, and it's the most important phase of staying expanded. Here's what normalization actually looks like. Your income fluctuates slightly and you don't panic. Your pace slows a bit and you don't assume failure. Your days feel less dramatic and you don't feel bored or guilty. You stop scanning for threats. You stop bracing for loss. You stop holding your breath. And your nervous system finally relaxes into the new baseline. This is when stability locks in. People who never normalize stay fragile. They're always managing, always monitoring, always waiting. People who normalize stop tracking every detail. They trust patterns instead of moments. They think in weeks and months instead of days. That's when decisions improve. Because urgency disappears. Urgency makes people sloppy. Calm makes people precise. Here's a subtle but powerful shift. When you normalize a new level, you stop asking, how do I protect this? And start asking, how do I live here well? Protection shrinks. Living expands. Living well means pacing your energy. It means building routines that support your life instead of draining it. It means letting success be quiet instead of dramatic. Quiet success lasts longer. This is also where people stop inflating their identity. They don't talk about the win constantly. They don't tie their worth to it. They don't need recognition for it. They let it be part of them, not the definition of them. That's emotional maturity, and maturity is what makes growth durable. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about how consistency changes once you're no longer trying to break through, and why doing less, not more, often keeps you expanded. Consistency changes once you're no longer trying to escape. At the beginning, consistency is aggressive. You push, you force, you override resistance. That kind of consistency is necessary when you're breaking through. It keeps you moving when doubt is loud. It carries you through uncertainty. But once you've expanded, that same intensity starts working against you. Because consistency is not about how hard you push. It's about how long you stay. Most people don't notice when they fail to make this shift. They keep applying breakout energy to a stabilized life. They stay urgent, they stay tight, they stay on, and eventually that constant output drains the system. This is where people start saying things like, I don't have the energy I used to. I feel less motivated than before. I don't know why this feels harder now. It feels harder because you're using the wrong tool. Early consistency is about discipline. Later consistency is about rhythm. Rhythm doesn't demand effort every moment. It creates flow over time. Think about breathing. You don't inhale aggressively all day. You don't force air into your lungs nonstop. You inhale, you exhale, you pause. That rhythm keeps you alive. Sustainable growth works the same way. People who stay expanded learn to protect their rhythm. They don't schedule their life to the edge. They leave space. They allow recovery. They build in margin, not because they're slowing down, because they're planning to stay. This is where many people feel conflicted. They think, if I rest more, I'll lose momentum. If I ease up, I'll fall behind. But momentum doesn't come from constant pressure. It comes from consistency without burnout. Burnout is what actually stops progress. People who stay expanded stop treating rest like a reward. They treat it like maintenance. Maintenance isn't exciting, but without it, everything breaks. They also change how they define a good day. A good day is no longer maximum output. It's alignment. Did I do what mattered? Did I move the needle? Did I protect my energy? That's enough. This shift removes guilt. Guilt is what makes people overwork. Overworking is what leads to collapse. When guilt disappears, pacing improves. When pacing improves, longevity increases. Here's a quiet truth. People who last don't do more than everyone else. They stop doing what doesn't matter. They cut friction, they reduce noise, they simplify decisions, and that simplicity frees up energy. Energy that can be used intentionally instead of reactively. Consistency at this level feels almost boring from the outside. No dramatic pushes, no constant hustle, no visible strain. But underneath that calm is discipline. Not the discipline of force, the discipline of restraint, the ability to stop when stopping preserves strength, the ability to slow down without spiraling, the ability to trust the process without micromanaging it. This kind of consistency doesn't spike. It compounds. And compounding is quiet. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about something that often triggers panic even in stable people: plateaus. And why flat periods are not a sign you're losing ground, but a sign you're integrating at a deeper level. Plateaus scare people more than failure. Failure feels loud. It feels obvious. You know something went wrong. A plateau is quiet. Nothing is falling apart. Nothing is clearly improving. Everything just stays the same. And that sameness makes people uneasy. They start watching things more closely, checking numbers more often, replaying decisions in their head. They ask, is this still working? Did I miss something? Shouldn't I be further along by now? That questioning doesn't come from logic. It comes from fear. Because for a long time, movement was how you measured safety. If things were changing, you were progressing. If things were stable, you were suspicious. So when growth pauses on the outside, your nervous system assumes something is wrong. But here's the truth most people never learn. Plateaus are not pauses in progress. They are periods of integration. They're when your system catches up to what you've already built. Think about learning any new skill. At first, improvement is visible. Every week, you can tell you're getting better. Then progress slows. Not because you stopped learning, but because learning moved underground. Your brain is wiring. Your body is adapting. Your reflexes are calibrating. If you interrupt that phase, you delay mastery. Growth works the same way. When income stabilizes, when responsibility settles, when your life feels less dramatic. That's not stagnation. That's absorption. People who don't understand this sabotage themselves. They panic. They reinvent too quickly. They abandon what's working. They think they need novelty to grow. But novelty without integration creates whiplash. They jump from strategy to strategy, from identity to identity, from direction to direction, and they wonder why nothing sticks. People who stay expanded do something different. They allow plateaus. They don't rush to label them. They don't interpret them as failure. They don't immediately change course. They ask a calmer question. What is settling right now? That question changes everything. Because it shifts your focus from outcome to capacity. Instead of asking, why isn't this growing faster? You ask, what am I becoming able to hold? That's a very different lens. Plateaus often show up right before the next expansion. Not because growth is about to explode, but because the foundation is strengthening. This is why forcing movement during a plateau often backfires. You don't need more action. You need more stability. Stability creates readiness. Readiness allows expansion. Another reason plateaus feel uncomfortable is comparison. You look around and see other people moving faster, launching new things, talking about growth, posting wins, and your quiet life feels inadequate. But what you don't see is how many of those people are outrunning their own capacity. They're growing externally faster than they can regulate internally. That always catches up. Plateaus protect you from that. They slow you down so you don't snap. They give your nervous system time to normalize a higher level of responsibility without collapse. This is why people who respect plateaus tend to last longer. They don't confuse stillness with stagnation. They don't confuse quiet with failure. They trust depth over speed. Here's something subtle. Plateaus are where confidence actually forms, not the loud confidence of excitement, the quiet confidence of familiarity. When you live at a level long enough that it stops feeling special, that's when it becomes yours. And once something is truly yours, you stop worrying about losing it. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about one of the deepest fears people carry at higher levels, the fear of losing what they've built, and how people who stay expanded dissolve that fear instead of fighting it. There's a fear that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't spike your heart rate. It doesn't create panic. It just sits quietly in the background. The fear is this. What if I lose it? Not lose everything, not collapse, just slip back. Most people never say this out loud. They don't even consciously think it most days. But it shapes behavior. It makes people cautious when they could be calm, tight when they could be open, alert when they could be settled. And that tension quietly drains joy from success. Here's the paradox. The more you try to protect what you've built, the more fragile it feels. Because protection implies danger. Your nervous system reads that signal and stays on guard. People who stay expanded don't eliminate this fear by convincing themselves it won't happen. They eliminate it by changing what it means if it does. This is subtle, but important. Most people believe losing progress would mean they failed, that it would erase who they've become, that it would confirm their worst fears, so they hold on tightly. But people who stay expanded learn something different. They learn that even if things change, they are not starting from zero anymore. They've built skills, judgment, awareness, regulation. Those don't disappear. Once you've expanded capacity, it doesn't vanish. It stays with you. Circumstances fluctuate. Capability remains. This realization softens fear at the root. You stop thinking, if this ends, I'm done, and start thinking, if this changes, I'll adapt. That shift is everything, because fear of loss keeps you tense. Confidence in adaptability keeps you steady. Here's where most people get stuck. They confuse safety with sameness. They think staying safe means keeping everything exactly as it is. But life doesn't work that way. Change happens. Markets move. People evolve. Seasons shift. Trying to freeze a moment creates anxiety. People who stay expanded accept movement. They don't cling. They don't brace. They don't live in constant vigilance. They trust their ability to respond. And that trust relaxes the nervous system. Relaxation doesn't make you careless. It makes you clear. Clear decisions come from calm. Calm allows perspective. Perspective prevents panic. This is why people who are internally safe appear externally confident. They're not reckless. They're not arrogant. They're grounded. They know they can rebuild if needed. They know they can adjust. They know they can handle discomfort without unraveling. That knowledge dissolves fear more effectively than reassurance ever could. Here's something many people miss. Fear of losing it is often fear of returning to who you used to be, but you're not that person anymore. You've seen a wider range. You've handled more. You've regulated through stress. You can't unknow that. So even if circumstances shift, you don't shrink all the way back. And once you realize that, you stop gripping so tightly. You start enjoying what you've built. You start breathing deeper. You stop scanning for collapse. This is the beginning of peace at higher levels. Not complacency, peace. Peace that allows growth to continue without force. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about the difference between calm ambition and frantic striving, and why one builds a life while the other quietly burns it down. There are two kinds of ambition. One is loud, the other is quiet. Frantic striving is the kind most people recognize. It's driven by urgency, by comparison, by the feeling that time is running out. It says, I need to move faster. I can't slow down. If I stop, I'll fall behind. That kind of ambition creates motion, but it also creates tension. Calm ambition feels different. It doesn't rush. It doesn't panic. It doesn't chase. It moves forward steadily without needing constant proof. Most people have never experienced calm ambition. They think ambition always has to feel intense. So when intensity fades, they assume ambition is gone. But it's not gone. It's matured. Calm ambition comes from clarity, not pressure. It knows where it's going. It knows why it's moving. It doesn't need urgency to stay in motion. This is why calm ambition feels almost invisible at first. There's no adrenaline, no dramatic pushes, no emotional spikes, just direction. People who learn this shift stop asking, how do I push myself harder? And start asking, how do I move forward without burning out? That question changes behavior instantly. Instead of sprinting, they pace. Instead of forcing, they refine. Instead of reacting, they choose. Frantic striving burns energy to feel alive. Calm ambition conserves energy to last. And lasting is what creates real freedom. Here's something subtle. Frantic striving is fueled by fear. Fear of falling behind. Fear of not being enough. Fear of missing out. Calm ambition is fueled by trust. Trust in process. Trust in self. Trust that steady movement compounds. Trust doesn't feel exciting. It feels solid. This is why people who operate from calm ambition often look slower from the outside. They aren't chasing every opportunity. They aren't reacting to every change. They aren't constantly pivoting. They're selecting. And selection is power. When you're no longer driven by urgency, you stop saying yes to everything. You protect your time. You protect your energy. You protect your attention, not because you're afraid, because you're intentional. This is where growth becomes spacious. You don't feel chased by your goals. You walk toward them. You don't measure your worth by speed. You measure it by alignment. This doesn't make you less driven. It makes you more precise. Precision beats intensity over time. Here's what calm ambition gives you that frantic striving never can. It gives you room to think, room to feel, room to enjoy what you're building while you're building it. It allows you to live inside your life instead of constantly racing toward a future that never arrives. Most people think pressure is the price of success. It's not. Pressure is the price of impatience. When you let go of impatience, ambition doesn't disappear. It steadies, and steady ambition is unstoppable. In the next chapter, we're going to bring everything together and talk about the final shift. How people make an expanded life feel ordinary, stable, and sustainable without losing meaning or momentum. There's a moment that feels almost disappointing when it finally arrives. The moment when your expanded life starts to feel ordinary, not exciting, not dramatic, just normal. For a lot of people, this moment creates confusion. They think, Is this it? Why doesn't this feel bigger? Why don't I feel more excited? But this moment is not a loss. It's the sign that something important has happened. You've stopped living toward your life and started living inside it. Early on, growth feels emotional. Wins feel charged. Progress feels sharp. That intensity is necessary when you're breaking out. But intensity is not sustainable. Sustainability looks quieter. It looks like waking up without pressure, making decisions without adrenaline, moving forward without needing constant motivation. That quiet can feel empty if you don't understand it. But it isn't emptiness, it's integration. Integration is when something no longer requires effort to maintain, when it stops needing attention, when it becomes part of you. This is what people actually want when they say they want success. Not excitement forever, but ease without collapse. Most people never let themselves reach this stage. They keep escalating, keep chasing bigger feelings, keep turning growth into performance, and eventually they exhaust themselves. People who stay expanded do something different. They let life become boring in the best way. Boring doesn't mean meaningless, it means stable. It means your nervous system isn't constantly scanning for danger. It means your days don't feel like tests. It means your worth isn't tied to outcomes. Boring is what allows joy to return naturally. Not the loud joy of achievement, the quiet joy of presence. You start enjoying small things again. Moments feel full. Time slows down. This is what happens when you're no longer living under threat. Here's the important reframe. If your expanded life feels ordinary, that means it's working. If you don't feel the need to prove anything, that means you're grounded. If you don't feel rushed, that means you trust yourself. If you don't feel chased, that means you've built capacity. Ordinary is the goal. Ordinary is what lasts. This doesn't mean ambition disappears. It means ambition stops yelling. It becomes a steady direction instead of a demand, a quiet pull instead of a push. You still grow. You still refine. You still expand. But you do it without sacrificing peace. That's the difference between success that drains you and success that sustains you. And once you reach this place, something subtle happens. You stop worrying about losing it because you realize it's not something you're holding. It's something you've become. That's the deepest form of security there is. No panic, no urgency, no constant self-monitoring. Just presence, just clarity, just movement that makes sense. This is where ceilings truly stop mattering, not because you're chasing higher numbers, but because you're no longer defined by limits at all. And that's the quiet freedom most people are actually looking for.